Hi, enjoy listening. The last thing Ethan Miller remembered before everything went black was the roar of his motorcycle engine and the sudden, blinding glare of headlights cutting across the empty road. He never saw the tractor until it was already too late. The impact hurled him through the air, and when he came to, pain screamed through his body. Pain that felt like it would never end. Now, 2 months later, he lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling of his father's sprawling house in Colorado, his legs refusing to obey him. His hands clenched the blanket as though he could crush the humiliation and anger out of existence. "Comfortable enough, Prince?" A mocking voice rang out, dragging him back into the present. Linda, his stepmother, stood in the doorway, arms folded over her chest. A heavy-set woman with dyed auburn hair and sharp eyes, she filled the room like a storm cloud. She smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Not too soft, I hope? Otherwise I could slip a pea under the mattress. We'll see if you're a real prince." Her laughter was low and cruel. Ethan turned away, biting his lip. He hated giving her the satisfaction of seeing him react. His wheelchair sat a few feet away, mocking him. A constant reminder of what he had lost. Linda moved closer, her perfume sharp in his nose. "You should be grateful, Ethan. Not everyone gets to come home to such attentive care, especially when you've become such a burden." Her words cut, but he refused to answer. He wanted to see his father. He wanted Robert Miller, the one man who had always believed in him, who had told him after the accident, "We'll fight this. You'll walk again." "Where's Dad?" Ethan finally asked, his voice hoarse. Linda's expression changed instantly, twisting into mock sorrow. She placed a hand dramatically over her chest. "Oh, Ethan, you don't know. Your poor father. He's in the hospital. His heart couldn't take the stress after your accident. He's clinging to life as we speak." Ethan felt the air drain out of his lungs. "What? No, he should have been here. He promised me." Linda shook her head, sighing as if the whole thing were his fault. "Yes, well, he wanted to be here, but he couldn't. So now it's just you, me, and Caleb." As if on cue, a man stepped into the doorway. Caleb Carter had just been released from prison and looked every bit the part. Thick, scarred knuckles, a buzz cut, and eyes that gleamed with mean humour. He tipped 2 fingers to his temple in mock salute. "Don't worry, kid," Caleb said, smirking. "We've got everything under control. Dad'll be back when he's ready. In the meantime, we'll take real good care of you." Something in his voice made Ethan's skin crawl. "And," Linda added with fake cheer, "we've even hired you a helper. She'll be staying here from now on." She clapped her hands, and into the room stepped a girl no older than 18. Her dark hair hung in loose waves. Her clothes were cheap and threadbare, but her eyes, large, dark, and full of a quiet sadness, held Ethan's gaze. Brown and uncertain, met Ethan's with quiet strength. "This is Hannah," Linda said briskly. "She doesn't talk, but don't worry. She understands just fine, and she works cheap. Perfect for you." Ethan stared, confused and furious. "I don't need her! I want to see my father! Now!" Linda's smile thinned, and her eyes grew cold. "All in good time, Ethan. All in good time. She turned on her heel, Caleb following behind her with a chuckle that echoed down the hallway. Left alone, Ethan looked at Hannah, who stood silently by the bed. Her hands twisted together nervously, but she didn't look away from him. "Bring me my phone," he demanded. "I need to call the hospital." Hannah's lips parted, but no sound came. She only shook her head and pointed toward the door. The message was clear: not allowed. Ethan's fists clenched tighter around the blanket. Rage surged through him, hotter than the pain in his useless legs. Something was wrong in this house. Terribly, terribly wrong. And he had no idea just how deep it went. Hannah Reyes moved quietly through the Miller house that evening, her bare feet making no sound on the polished hardwood floors. She had been shown to a small room off the kitchen, hardly more than a converted storage space, but it didn't matter. A roof over her head, a bed, and a job were more than she and her mother had dared to hope for just a month ago. Linda Carter Miller had found her on the street. Hannah remembered the way the woman's eyes had lingered on her. Calculating, sharp. Linda hadn't flinched at the sight of Hannah's ragged clothes, her silence, the cardboard sign she had been holding while her mother begged near the bus depot. Instead, Linda had smiled, almost like a hunter spotting prey. "You want work?" she had asked. "Something easy, just looking after a boy? Food, a room, and a little pay? That's better than sleeping out here, isn't it?" For Hannah, who had spent her entire life being told she was useless because she couldn't speak, it had seemed like a miracle. But that was before she met Ethan. He had looked at her as if she were an intruder, another reminder of everything he hated about his life now. His anger wasn't new to her. People had stared at her that way before, frustrated that she couldn't answer them, couldn't explain herself with words. Still, something about the fury in his eyes unsettled her more deeply than usual. She told herself it didn't matter. She needed this job, for her and for her mother, Marisol. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. The accident replayed in his head over and over. The flash of headlights, the bone-crushing impact, the silence afterward. His legs felt like lead under the blanket. No sensation, no movement. He had always believed he could rebuild his life, as long as his father was there to push him forward. But now his father was gone, and he was trapped here with Linda and her brother, and the mute girl. He turned his head toward the dim outline of the door. He had heard her footsteps earlier, soft, cautious, almost fearful. She was probably in the kitchen now, preparing whatever scraps Linda allowed her to cook. He wondered what her story was. Why couldn't she talk? Why would someone so young end up in a place like this, working for people like Linda? Thought nagged at him, but it wasn't enough to dull his anger. "I don't need a babysitter," he muttered to the ceiling. Hannah stood over the stove, stirring soup in a dented pot. The smell of onions and chicken broth filled the air, and for the first time in weeks, she felt almost human again. She thought of her mother, who was still living in a shelter downtown, waiting for Hannah to earn enough to rent even the smallest apartment for them. From her pocket, she pulled a folded, creased photograph. Her mother had given it to her only once, years ago, saying nothing but looking at it with tears streaming down her face. The photo showed a younger Marisol, smiling with a man whose arm was around her shoulders, a baby in her arms. On the back, in faded handwriting, were the words, "I hate you for what you did. Don't ever come back." Hannah didn't know who had written the message. She only knew it had broken something inside her mother. And maybe inside herself too. She shoved the picture back into her pocket, just as the back door creaked. Her heart jumped, then sank when she saw Caleb stride in. "Well, well," he drawled, tossing his jacket over a chair. His voice always carried a note of threat, like a knife against glass. "Our little mute chef smells good. Guess you're not completely useless." Hannah kept her eyes on the pot, her knuckles tightening around the spoon. He stepped closer, invading her space. "You know, Sis might have been onto something bringing you here. A pretty girl like you, quiet as a mouse. It's almost like you were made for this house." Hannah's breath caught. She wanted to run, but where would she go? Before Caleb could say anything more, Linda's voice rang out from the hall. "Caleb, leave her alone. We've got bigger things to worry about than your gains." He chuckled, gave Hannah a long, unsettling look, and backed off. But Hannah knew then that she wasn't just here to be a caretaker. She was here because Linda and Caleb wanted something. And whatever it was, it had nothing to do with Ethan's comfort. Upstairs, Ethan stared at the ceiling, unaware of the quiet war beginning to unfold under his own roof. But soon he would know. Very soon. Robert Miller had always been a man of steel. At 55, he was still broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that filled a room, even when he wasn't speaking. He built his empire on grit and instinct, first in mining, then in retail, turning a small-town hardware store into a chain of appliance outlets across the state. But now, Robert was sitting on a cold concrete floor, in the darkness of his own basement, his wrists sore from the zip ties that bound them. He hadn't seen daylight in over a week. The last memory before waking up here was of Linda handing him a glass of wine after dinner. He had been tired, restless about Ethan's accident, his mind circling the boy's future, and he hadn't thought twice. The wine had tasted off, but he was too weary to care. Moments later, everything had gone black. When he came to, Caleb was standing over him with a smirk, and Linda was calmly explaining the new arrangement. "All you have to do, Robert," she had said smoothly, "is sign over power of attorney. Once you do that, you'll be free. But until then, this is where you'll stay." Robert had spat back at her, refusing. His whole life, he had fought against men who tried to corner him. He wasn't about to hand over his business to the woman who had slithered into his life, pretending to be his salvation after Lillian, his first wife, had disappeared all those years ago. Now, days later, he was weaker, thinner, but no less stubborn. He knew Linda. If he signed, it would be the end. She wouldn't leave him alive. Upstairs, Hannah carried a tray of food into Ethan's room. He hadn't spoken to her all day except to demand things she wasn't allowed to give him. A phone, his laptop, contact with the outside world. She set the tray on his nightstand. Soup and bread. Simple but warm. "I don't want it," Ethan muttered, turning away. Hannah sighed through her nose, then sat the spoon down firmly against the bowl, catching his eye. She pointed at him, then at the food, then back at him again. Eat. He blinked at her boldness. Nobody, not even nurses at the rehab center, had ever dared to give him orders like that. For a moment, he almost laughed. Was she for someone who can't even talk? He said under his breath. Her eyes narrowed. She folded her arms. Ethan exhaled, grabbed the spoon, and tasted the broth. He wouldn't admit it aloud, but it was better than anything Linda had bothered to give him. "Where did you even come from?" he asked after a moment. "Linda just pulled you off the street?" Hannah froze, then gave the smallest of nods. "And you just agreed?" She hesitated, then nodded again. Ethan studied her, something tugging at the back of his mind. There was more to her story, but she wasn't about to tell him. That night Hannah couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow cot in the kitchen's back room, staring at the cracked ceiling. Something about the house unsettled her. It wasn't just Linda's sharp tongue or Caleb's eyes that followed her like a shadow. It was the feeling that there were things happening here that no one was supposed to see. The air vents carried strange noises at night. Heavy thumps, scraping. Once she swore she had heard a man's voice. Low, desperate, almost like a prayer. She told herself she had imagined it. But the next evening, when she was cleaning the kitchen, she saw it. A sliver of paper sticking out from under the baseboard near the pantry. She knelt, tugged at it, and slid out a folded note. Her hands shook as she read the scrawled handwriting. "Help me. My name is Robert Miller. They're keeping me in the basement. Tell my son." Hannah's heart pounded so loudly she thought it would give her away. Robert Miller, the father Ethan had been begging to see, alive, imprisoned beneath their feet. She shoved the note into her pocket, just as Linda's voice rang from the hallway. "Hannah, come help me with Ethan's medication." Hannah swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe evenly as she turned away from the pantry. Now she knew the truth, and with that knowledge came danger she could no longer ignore. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of footsteps in his room. Not Linda's heavy stride or Caleb's lumbering shuffle. Lighter, quieter. When he cracked his eyes open, he saw Hannah standing by his nightstand, her hands curled nervously against her chest. She seemed different. Her eyes darted toward the door, then back to him, as if making sure they were alone. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. Hannah glanced again at the door, then reached into the pocket of her worn skirt. She pulled out a small, folded scrap of paper and pressed it quickly into his hand. Her fingers trembled. Ethan frowned, opening it under the blanket. His pulse shot up instantly when he read the words. "Help me. My name is Robert Miller. They're keeping me in the basement. Tell my son." His chest tightened. He looked at Hannah, eyes blazing. "Where did you get this?" he demanded in a harsh whisper. Hannah raised a finger to her lips, begging him to stay quiet. She pointed downward, toward the floor. "The basement," Ethan breathed. His mind reeled. His father wasn't in a hospital. He wasn't clinging to life under the care of doctors. He was here, in his own house, a prisoner. Ethan wanted to scream, to wheel himself straight to the basement and tear the door off its hinges. But his useless legs betrayed him, and Hannah's terrified expression made him pause. Linda, Caleb, they had done this. His jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Hannah tugged at his sleeve, motioning for him to stay calm. She mimed holding a phone, then shrugged helplessly. "No phone," Ethan muttered. He didn't have one. Linda had made sure of that. But the note in his hand burned like fire. His father was alive, and he had to get him out. Downstairs, Linda poured herself a glass of orange juice and flipped through a stack of papers Caleb had laid out on the counter. "Not good enough," she snapped. "The signature line needs to be clearer. He's stubborn, but if we make him think it's just for medical expenses, he might break." Caleb leaned against the counter, grinning. "Sis, you've been working this guy for years. If he hasn't broken yet, maybe it's time to try persuasion. A little reminder of what happens if he doesn't play ball." Linda's eyes glinted. "Ethan." Caleb chuckled darkly. "Bingo." That afternoon, Linda breezed into Ethan's room with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How are we today, sweetheart?" she cooed, setting a pill bottle down on the dresser. Ethan glared at her. He wanted to scream that he knew, that her lies were unraveling, but Hannah's warning echoed in his head. "Stay quiet." "I'm fine," he said flatly. Linda tilted her head. "Good, because your father is still very sick, and it would break his heart to know you weren't cooperating." She picked up the pill bottle, rattled it, then poured 2 into her palm. "Take these." Ethan hesitated, then swallowed them dry. "That's my boy," Linda said sweetly. She brushed a hand against his cheek, and he fought the urge to recoil. "Everything's going to work out, as long as you do as you're told." She left, and the room seemed colder without her in it. Ethan clenched his fists, whispering under his breath, "I'll get you out, Dad, I swear." Hannah, who had been waiting silently by the door, nodded. Her eye said what her mouth could not. "You're not alone anymore." That night, while Caleb snored on the couch and Linda's bedroom door stayed shut, Hannah crept back into Ethan's room. She carried a flashlight wrapped in cloth to dim its glow. She pointed to the floor again, then toward the hallway. "You want to show me?" Ethan whispered. She nodded. "Then let's go." It was clumsy, agonizingly slow work, transferring him from the bed to his wheelchair. His arms strained, his legs hung limp, but Hannah was stronger than she looked, steadying him with surprising determination. Finally, they crept down the hallway together, the wheels of the chair barely making a sound. At the far end of the corridor, Hannah stopped before a locked door. She pressed her hand to the wood, eyes wide, as if she could see through it. "This is it," Ethan breathed. His heart hammered so loud he was sure it would wake the whole house. From the other side came a faint sound, a cough. Ethan's throat tightened. "Dad?" There was silence, then a hoarse, unbelieving whisper. "Ethan." Tears stung his eyes. He pressed his palm against the door. "It's me, Dad. I'm here." The sound of Robert's voice on the other side of the door nearly broke Ethan in two. For a moment, he forgot about his useless legs, about Linda's poison-sweet smile, about Caleb's shadow lurking in every hallway. All that mattered was that his father was alive. "I knew it," Ethan whispered, pressing harder against the wood. "I knew you weren't gone." "Son, listen to me," Robert's voice rasped, low and urgent. "They're after everything. Don't let them." He broke off in a fit of coughing. Hannah crouched near the lock, examining it. It wasn't a simple latch, but a heavy, rusted bolt padlocked into place. Her brow furrowed. She motioned with her hands as if to say, "I need something sharp, something strong." Ethan scanned the hallway, his pulse racing. "Kitchen," he whispered. "Knives." They moved back as silently as possible. Hannah pushing the wheelchair, Ethan holding his breath at every squeak of the wheels. The kitchen was dark, except for the faint moonlight spilling across the tiles. Hannah slipped to the drawer, eased it open, and pulled out the largest butcher knife she could find. They hurried back to the basement door, Ethan gripping the knife with trembling hands before passing it to her. Hannah wedged the blade into the padlock, straining with all her weight. Metal groaned, but it didn't give. "Keep trying," Ethan urged, his voice almost breaking. Finally, with a muffled snap, the lock cracked. Hannah froze, her eyes wide with hope. She tugged the bolt aside, and the door creaked open an inch. A rush of stale, damp air spilled out. "Ethan," Robert whispered again, his voice stronger now. "Get me out of here." But then a light snapped on behind them. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Linda's voice rang out, smooth as glass and sharp as ice. Ethan whipped around, his blood turning cold. Linda stood in her silk robe, arms crossed, Caleb looming behind her, with a crowbar in one hand. "Thought you could outsmart us, huh?" Caleb sneered. Ethan's heart pounded. Hannah stepped in front of him instinctively, the butcher knife still in her grip. "Oh, darling," Linda said softly, almost pitying. "You really shouldn't have trusted her. Hannah doesn't know which side she's on yet." Her gaze slid toward the girl. "Do you, my dear?" Hannah's hands shook, but she didn't lower the knife. She stayed between Ethan and Caleb, her silence screaming louder than words. Linda sighed dramatically. "Fine. Have it your way." She nodded once. Caleb lunged. Hannah swung the knife wildly, the blade grazing Caleb's arm. He cursed, yanking it from her hand and sending her stumbling into the wall. Ethan shouted, trying to wheel himself back, but Caleb slammed the door to the basement shut again, the lock clanging back into place. Robert's desperate pounding echoed from the other side. "No!" Ethan roared. Linda leaned down, her face inches from his. Her voice was low and venomous. "That was your one chance. Next time, I won't be so forgiving." She straightened, motioning to Caleb. "Take Hannah downstairs. Let her spend some time with dear Robert. Maybe the dark will remind her where her loyalties should lie." Caleb grabbed Hannah roughly by the arm. She fought, her nails scratching at his skin, but he dragged her toward the door. Ethan's heart sank as he watched her disappear down into the darkness. For the first time since the accident, Ethan felt truly helpless. He couldn't run. He couldn't fight. All he had left was his mind, and the burning promise he made to himself as Linda's smile widened in triumph. "I will get you both out of here, whatever it takes." The basement smelled of damp concrete and old wood. The single bulb overhead buzzed faintly, casting a weak glow that barely reached the far corners. Hannah stumbled as Caleb shoved her down the steps. She caught herself on the railing, her heart hammering, and landed hard on the cold floor. Robert, hunched against the wall, looked up in alarm. His face was pale and unshaven, eyes sunken from weeks, maybe months, of captivity. But when he saw Hannah, confusion replaced the weariness. "Who's this?" His voice was hoarse but carried a surprising strength. Caleb grinned, blood still oozing from the cut on his arm. "Your new roommate. Thought maybe the two of you could get better acquainted." He tossed the knife Hannah had dropped up the stairs, slammed the door shut, and twisted the lock. Darkness swallowed them again, save for the dim bulb. Hannah pressed her back to the wall, breathing hard. Robert studied her, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "Are you with them?" She shook her head violently, then hesitated. Slowly, she traced a cross over her chest with her finger and pointed upward, as if swearing to God. Robert let out a long breath. "You can't talk, can you?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Then you'll have to listen." He shifted, wincing, and pulled his knees close. "I don't know how much Ethan told you, but Linda wasn't always this monster. She was part of my life once. Too close, if I'm honest." Hannah leaned forward, her eyes fixed on him. Robert's gaze dropped. "She was my assistant. Smart, ambitious. But she wanted more than money. She wanted control. She thought marrying me would give her that. I said no. And when I met Ethan's mother, well, let's just say Linda didn't take rejection kindly." He rubbed a hand over his face. "She vanished for years. I thought it was over. Then she came back with Caleb, started circling, asking about Ethan, about the business. At first I brushed it off. Then she made threats, about accidents happening, about Ethan not making it through one of his long drives home from college." Hannah's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Robert's jaw tightened. "When Ethan's crash happened, I knew. I knew she had something to do with it. And when I confronted her, she made her move. Locked me down here, told me she'd take care of Ethan herself." His voice broke. "I thought he was dead until tonight." The truth sat heavy between them. Hannah pressed her forehead against her knees, her whole body trembling. Robert reached out, laying a hand gently on her arm. "You're not with her. I can see that, which means you're my only chance. And Ethan's too." Upstairs, the floorboards creaked. Voices murmured faintly. Linda's sharp, controlled tone, Caleb's lazy drawl. Hannah and Robert held their breath, waiting for silence to return. When it did, Robert leaned close, whispering fiercely, "There's a crawl space behind these walls. Old storm access. They never found it when they locked me down here. If we can pry the boards loose, we might have a way out." Hope flickered in Hannah's eyes. She scrambled to the wall he pointed at, running her hands along the rough planks until she felt a faint draft. Her fingers traced the seams, and she looked back at him with determination. Robert gave a weak smile. "Good. You're braver than you look." For the first time in months, he felt a shift in the darkness. Not victory, yet, but the first crack in Linda's prison. And upstairs, Ethan stared at his ceiling, sleepless, vowing silently, "They think they've broken us. They're wrong." Ethan sat in his wheelchair, staring at the ceiling, while the house settled into its midnight silence. Every creak of the floorboards above, every sigh of wind against the shutters, set his nerves on edge. He could still hear faintly, in his memory, the pounding of Robert's fists on the basement door, and Hannah's muffled cries as Caleb dragged her down. Linda thought she had won. That much was clear in her smug smile. In the way she poured herself another glass of wine after the confrontation, humming as though the entire scene was some minor inconvenience. But her arrogance, that was where Ethan saw his opening. She underestimates me. She always has. He turned his wheelchair toward the desk in the corner of his room, dragging himself slowly across the rug. The bottom drawer was locked, but Linda had never thought to check it. His fingers fumbled with the small key he'd hidden beneath the lamp base. The lock clicked, and he pulled the drawer open. Inside lay his old laptop. The battery was dead, of course. He plugged it in, praying the ancient machine would still run. The screen flickered to life, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt control at his fingertips. He opened a folder labelled Archives, his father's files, backups Robert had asked him to store years ago. Business contracts, bank statements, and, most importantly, emails. He skimmed through correspondence between Robert and Linda, back when she worked for him. There it was. Threats. Carefully veiled, but threats nonetheless. If he could find proof that she'd manipulated the company, the finances, maybe even Ethan's accident. Insurance fraud. Shell companies, he murmured. His pulse quickened as puzzle pieces began to align. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Ethan quickly shut the laptop and shoved it beneath a blanket. The door opened, and Linda stood there in her nightgown, her glass of wine still in hand. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly, almost motherly. Ethan forced a weak smile. "Not really. Too much on my mind." She drifted closer, her perfume cloying. "You're smart, Ethan. Smarter than your father ever gave you credit for. You could have everything if you just stopped clinging to him. He's a relic. I'm the future. Caleb and I, we know how to take what we deserve." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he lowered his gaze, pretending to waver. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I just don't know who to trust anymore." Her smile widened, triumphant. She reached out, brushing his cheek with cold fingers. "Trust me, darling. I'll never let you fall again." Ethan nodded, swallowing back the bile rising in his throat. "Okay, I'll think about it." Satisfied, Linda glided back toward the door, humming again as she left. When the lock clicked behind her, Ethan exhaled shakily. His hands trembled, but not with fear, with purpose. "She thinks I'm bending. Let her. The more she believes I'm hers, the less she'll see the knife coming." Down below, Hannah and Robert worked feverishly at the boards in the basement wall. With every groan of splintering wood, the draft grew stronger, the promise of freedom closer. And upstairs, Ethan reopened his laptop, determination hardening in his eyes. This wasn't just about escape anymore. This was war. The night pressed down on the house, thick and heavy, as if the very walls knew secrets they were desperate to contain. In the basement, Hannah's hands were raw from clawing at the planks, her fingernails chipped and bleeding. Robert guided her, his weakened frame shaking from the effort, but his voice steady. "Right there. Pry at the seam. Don't stop." The wood groaned, splintered, and at last a small wedge of darkness yawned open. A cool breath of air whispered through, carrying with it the smell of soil and wet stone. Hannah's chest hitched. Freedom lay beyond. Robert pressed his hand against the opening. It leads to the old storm crawl. If we can widen it, we can reach the cellar door under the porch. Quietly, slowly. If they hear us, it's over. Hannah nodded, sweat trickling down her temple. She dug harder, ignoring the sting of splinters embedding into her skin. Upstairs, Ethan sat at his desk, laptop glowing faintly in the dark. His heart thundered with every keystroke. He had discovered something. A series of transfers. Money funneled from Robert's company into offshore accounts. All signed with Linda's forged approvals. Embezzlement. Fraud. Enough to bury her. He copied the files to a flash drive he'd hidden years ago, sliding it into his pocket. His plan was fragile, but it was a plan. Use her greed against her. Draw her in close, then expose her. But first, he needed time. The door creaked again, and Ethan's pulse spiked. He slammed the laptop shut, just as Caleb leaned in, chewing on a toothpick, his smirk lazy and mocking. "Burning the midnight oil?" Caleb asked. His eyes darted to the desk, suspicious. "You hiding something from us, golden boy?" Ethan forced himself to look bored. "Just reading old files. Trying to feel useful." Caleb stepped inside, circling Ethan like a predator, testing its prey. He bent down, his breath sour. "You're smart. Too smart for your own good. Don't get ideas." He tapped Ethan's forehead with his finger, sharp enough to sting. "Linda's the one running the show now. You'd better get used to it." Ethan smiled thinly. "I'm already used to it." Caleb grinned, satisfied, and left, slamming the door. Ethan let his mask fall, his hand tightening into a fist. "Not much longer, Caleb. Not much longer." In the basement, the opening was now wide enough for Hannah to squeeze through. She glanced back at Robert, her eyes burning with determination. "You first," he whispered, voice hoarse. She shook her head, pressing his hand toward the gap. "You go." Robert hesitated, then nodded. He lowered himself onto his stomach and began inching forward, every scrape of fabric against wood sounding deafening in the silence. Hannah pressed her hands against the planks to steady them. Then footsteps above, heavy, deliberate. Caleb's voice, drawling and amused. "Full ahead, my scurrying." Robert froze. Hannah's blood ran cold. The basement door creaked open, spilling a shaft of light down the stairs. Caleb stood there, silhouetted, holding a flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other. "Well, well," he said, his grin widening. "Looks like somebody found a rabbit hole." The beam of Caleb's flashlight cut through the damp air, blinding Hannah and pinning Robert in the crawl space, like prey caught in a snare. "Well, ain't this sweet?" Caleb drawled, tapping the crowbar against his palm. "Daddy trying to crawl away, little mouse helping him." Hannah's heart thundered, but she stepped forward, blocking Caleb's view of Robert. "It's not what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think," Caleb snapped, his grin curling cruelly. "And you're both about to learn what happens to people who don't stay where they're put." He advanced down the stairs, each step deliberate, the crowbar gleaming. Robert, half wedged into the crawl space, hissed, "Go, Hannah. Run." But Hannah didn't move. She grabbed a broken board from the pile of debris and raised it like a weapon. Her voice shook, but her eyes were steady. "You'll have to go through me." Caleb chuckled, almost admiring. "Brave, stupid but brave." He lunged. The basement erupted in chaos. Hannah swung the board, splintering it against his shoulder. Caleb snarled, the crowbar arcing dangerously close to her head. Robert, with every ounce of strength left in his battered body, shoved himself backward from the crawl space and hurled into Caleb's legs. The bigger man stumbled, crashing against the wall with a roar. "Run, Hannah!" Robert barked. But Hannah grabbed the flashlight Caleb had dropped and swung it upward into his face. He howled, blood spraying as the metal cracked against his nose. For a moment, there was silence, but for Caleb's ragged breathing. Then, his rage exploded. He charged, grabbing Hannah by the hair. Upstairs, Ethan sat in his wheelchair, hands steady as he placed the flash drive into the laptop. The files were ready. Every damning document lined up like bullets. He sent them to a secure contact he'd set up years ago, an old business associate of Robert's, who hated Linda almost as much as Ethan did. The progress bar crawled forward. Suddenly, Linda appeared in the doorway, glass of wine in hand. Her smile sharp. "Still awake, darling?" Ethan didn't look up. Couldn't sleep. Her eyes narrowed. She glided forward, circling behind him. "You're hiding something." The upload reached 90%. Ethan's voice was calm, flat. "So are you." Linda's smile faltered. "What did you say?" He turned, meeting her gaze for the first time without flinching. "I know everything, Linda. The accounts, the fraud, the lies. You ruined my father, tried to ruin me. But you underestimated one thing." The upload finished with a soft chime. Ethan's phone vibrated. Confirmation sent. Her face drained of colour. "What did you do?" "I let the world see you for who you are," Ethan said coldly. In the basement, the struggle reached its breaking point. Caleb, bleeding and furious, swung the crowbar. Hannah ducked, the blow shattering the wall instead. Robert tackled him again, both men crashing to the ground. Hannah seized the crowbar, adrenaline surging, and with a scream she swung, striking Caleb across the head. The giant crumpled, twitching once before going still. The basement filled with the sound of Hannah's gasping breaths. Robert leaned against the wall, trembling, eyes locked on his daughter. "You saved us." Upstairs, Linda lunged for Ethan's laptop, but he yanked it away, slamming it shut. "It's over," he told her. "By morning, they'll all know. The police, the board, everyone." Linda's mask cracked, her eyes wide with something he had never seen in her before. Fear. And beneath their feet, Robert and Hannah climbed from the basement, battered but alive, as the house that had held them captive for so long prepared to witness its final reckoning. Morning broke grey and cold over the house. The storm finally passed. For the first time in years, silence felt like freedom rather than suffocation. Police cars lined the gravel drive. Officers moved briskly in and out, their radios crackling. their boots crunching on frost. Caleb's body was carried out on a stretcher, his face covered. Linda stood handcuffed on the porch, her designer robe hanging askew, screaming at anyone who would listen. "This is a mistake. I built everything. I built this family." But no one listened. The officers guided her down the steps, her bare feet slapping against the cold board. Robert sat wrapped in a blanket in the back of an ambulance, a paramedic tending to his bruises. Hannah sat beside him, her hand clasped tightly around his, refusing to let go. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We're safe." Robert turned his head, studying her face as though memorizing every line. "I should have protected you better. I should have seen." "No," Hannah interrupted firmly. "You gave me the strength to fight back. That's what matters." Tears welled in his tired eyes, but this time he didn't hide them. Inside, Ethan watched from the wheelchair, the weight of everything finally settling on him. He had played his final card, and it had worked. The files he released spread like wildfire through the board, the news, the authorities. Linda's empire was already crumbling. A detective approached. "You did the right thing, son. We'll need a statement, but you've handed us everything we need." Ethan nodded, numb but resolute. "She can't hurt us anymore." The detective gave a short, respectful nod before moving on. When Ethan turned, he saw Hannah standing at the doorway of the ambulance, her face streaked with tears, yet lit with a fragile hope. For the first time since his injury, she crossed the distance and wrapped her arms around him. He stiffened at first, unaccustomed to touch, to comfort. Then slowly, cautiously, he let himself lean into it. Weeks later, the house stood empty, its windows boarded, its halls abandoned. It was no longer a home, but a mausoleum of lies and cruelty. The town whispered about it, a place cursed by its own history. But far away, in a modest rental house filled with sunlight, Robert, Hannah, and Ethan began to stitch their lives back together. The scars remained, visible and invisible, but so did something else, a bond forged in fire, unbreakable. On a quiet Sunday morning, Hannah brewed coffee in the kitchen, the rich smell filling the air. Robert sat at the table with a newspaper, glasses perched on his nose, while Ethan scrolled through his laptop, this time not hiding, but simply living. The weight of the past lingered, but it no longer defined them. For the first time in a long time, the future was theirs to choose. And that, at last, was freedom. If you like the story, I would be very happy to have your support. Click the thumbs up. And to not miss new stories, subscribe and click on the bell. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and all the best.